Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out, both in person and through the miracle of the internet over Zoom, to hear about this really incredible pioneer in the world of film and of animation in particular. Lotte Reiniger said, "When I was a child, I had the uncanny ability to cut out silhouettes, but I didn't like for them to remain motionless. As an animator, motion is incredibly important to Lotte's work, and so I am including very short video clips of her movies within the talk. I hope that this will all go smoothly, both in person and over the internet. But if you are watching on Zoom and something is going wrong, you can always reach Haley over chat. Keep that in mind. Lotte was born on June 2nd, 1899, to a middle-class family in Berlin. She was an only child. And in a later Sight and Sound article that she wrote in 1936, she expanded on this quote. She said, "I could cut out silhouettes almost as soon as I could manage to hold a pair of scissors. I could paint too, and read and recite, but these things did not surprise anyone very much. But everybody was astonished by the scissor cuts, which seemed a more unusual accomplishment. The silhouettes were very much praised. Did anyone warn me as to where this path would lead? Not in the least. I was encouraged to continue." By age 12, she had started shadow puppetry, and she would do performances both at home and at her school. And you can imagine, so this is in the early 1900s, and Lotte is growing up at the same time as the nascent film industry is. And for a young girl like her, film must have been an eye-opening experience. And she was in Germany, where German Expressionism was just sort of starting to take off as a film concept. Of course, it was an art historical concept before that. And the German Expressionist films were these fantastical psychological fairy tales, pretty much. And one of the directors early and important in the German Expressionist film movement was Paul Wegener. And he was going around Germany giving talks on film, and more specifically on the technical side. And so here is a quote from Paul Wegener in a talk that he was giving in 1916. "Suddenly, we would see before our very eyes a world of pure fantasy come to life. Such effects can also be achieved with specially constructed little models, animated like marionettes. We are entering a new pictorial fantasy world as we would a magical forest." Now, we don't have to imagine what Lotte would have made of attending one of Paul Wegener's lectures, because she did. She said later in life, "When cinema appeared, I was bowled over. What I remember being most excited by were the fantasy films of Georges Méliès. In 1915, I went to a lecture given by a man named Paul Wegener, who had made the film Der Golem." And that is a picture from Der Golem up on the screen. He was talking about the technical side and special effects, which I found fascinating. I was 15 years old. I said to myself, "This is a man I must meet." I enrolled at the Reinhardt Theater School, where he was very kind to me and ended up giving me small parts in his films. And she had enrolled in the theater school to be an actress. And so when she says small parts in his films, she does mean in that capacity. But the more important thing that Paul Wegener gave her in terms of small parts in his films was through her scissors and silhouettes. because he noticed this skill. She would be sitting backstage and just idly cutting silhouettes of the actors. And he realized that this skill could be used in the intertitles for silent films. And so Lotte created quite delightful, elaborate intertitles to explain what was going on in these silent films. This intertitle is from The Pied Piper of Hamelin, which was made in 1918. So Lotte was 19 years old at the time. And you can see it's the plague of rats. And in true Lotte style, the rats are both very rat-like, but also there's whimsy involved. You can see them dancing on the chandeliers and down by the floor near the lamp. The Pied Piper of Hamelin also was the first opportunity for Lotte to actually animate in a film. They needed to have rats following the Pied Piper through the streets of Hamelin. And Paul Wegener felt that this would be best accomplished by animating wooden rats. The producers felt that that sounded expensive and time-consuming, and that they should just use real rats. So Lotte, as a member of the film crew, was given a basket full of rats, and various members of the film crew went into the basements along the street, and Paul Wegener went down the street playing his pipes, and there was a signal, and all of the crew put the rats out through the window, and they scattered, and they did not follow the Pied Piper. And so Paul Wegener went back to the producers and said, "I think we should animate the rats." And the producers said, "Why not guinea pigs?" So they tied little tails onto the guinea pigs, and Lotte and the rest of the crew went down into the basements, and at the signal, put the guinea pigs through the window, and the guinea pigs did not scatter. According to Lotte, they sat in the road and played with each other and lost their tails. At that point, Paul Wegener was like, "Seriously, we should animate the rats," and the producers were like, "Maybe you're right." And so Lotte and the crew painstakingly would move the rats in between each shot for a stop motion animation, and these wooden rats actually did what the script asked of them and followed the Pied Piper out of the town. And so with this taste of animation, and in Lotte's book, she kind of downplays her role in it. I think that she was sort of the lead animator on that. At this point, Paul Wegener recommended that she become part of a new film science and technology group called the Institute for Cultural Research, which endeavored through collaborations between scientists and artists to fuse artistic principles with film's unique properties and to create an entirely new expressive form. And so going into the 1920s, Lotte made the move into what she called trick films. And here she is sitting at her trick table at the Cultural Institute. Above her, the big black box is the camera, and then down below is her light table where she is animating a silhouette. She said, in 1918, Wegener introduced me to a group of young people who had just started a studio for scientific and experimental films and suggested that they take me on. My first film at the studio was The Ornament of a Lovestuck Heart, made with silhouettes. It went down very well. Only 5 minutes long, it was shown in cinemas. And in true Lotte style, she is downplaying the reaction. It played for 40 weeks in German art house cinemas. People were very impressed by the intricacies of this animation. And so here we have a little clip from The Ornament of the Lovestuck Heart. And at the risk of drawing back the curtain and maybe destroying a little of the magic, though Lotte always was very open about her processes, I'm going to show you a little bit about how she accomplished these incredible animations. Here you can see the actual silhouette that she used, the female figure, for Ornament of the Lovestuck Heart. It was made out of very thinly rolled lead that she cut out. In her later films, she realized that a combination of lead and cardboard would move a little bit more smoothly. So on the right, you can see the sort of pieces of the jointed silhouette marionettes. And in the middle figure, you can see that there are cutouts that are white and cutouts that are striped. The striped ones are the pieces that she would have used lead for. So having the extremities, the toes, the legs, parts of the arms out of lead to help keep the figure in place, and then the other pieces in lighter cardboard to move more smoothly. Lotte described the technique for her films. She says, the technique of this type of film is very simple. As with cartoon drawings, the silhouette films are photographed movement by movement. But instead of using drawings, silhouette marionettes are used. These marionettes are cut out of black cardboard and thin lead, every limb being cut separately and joined with wire hinges. A study of natural movement is very important so that the little figures appear to move just as men and women and animals do. The backgrounds for the characters are cut out with scissors as well and designed to give a unified style to the whole picture. They are cut from layers of transparent paper. And then once she would have made all of the figures, she would have then placed them onto her trick table. And she describes in her book, Shadow Puppets, Shadow Theaters, and Shadow Films, how one can make a trick table of one's own. Lotte said, you take one of the articulated shadow figures and lay it flat on a glass plate covered with transparent paper. Then you saw a hole in your kitchen table about the size of the glass plate. Modern kitchens don't want tables anyway. Put the glass plate with the figure over the hole, place a lamp on the floor under the hole, switch it on and switch off all other lights, and the figure will appear as a pure silhouette. And she, as you can see, very carefully detailed exactly how one can build a trick table, and step by step explained how one could animate one of these films. Lotte really wanted to share this art with the world and to have other people be making films like this. And here you can see a picture of Lotte working on a trick table that looks very similar to the diagram that you just saw. I believe this photo was taken in probably 1931, because I think she's animating Harlequin on the table there. Most of the figures were 9 inches high for most of the action. For long shots, she would make figures that were 5 inches high. And for close-ups, she would need to cut out bigger, more detailed head and torso. So for each film, the main characters, she would have to cut out dozens of figures for each one, and different orientation, different heads and hands for different situations and expressions. By 1922, Lotte was making slightly longer films, and she created a 12-minute film of Cinderella. Fairy tales were a constant in her life, and this Cinderella, quite charmingly in the opening intertitles, says that it is a tale told by a pair of scissors. And then she quite beautifully showed this in a little meta commentary. She animated her own hands cutting out the figure of Cinderella. So. And that is how she would cut silhouettes out. The scissors would stay pretty much still, stationary, and she would move the paper around. And people were just mesmerized by her ability to do that. She would say, I just want to tell stories, spin a yarn, dream. I never expect my audience to split their sides laughing. I try instead to tempt them to smile. And throughout her work, she has lots of very witty little touches and asides, like having the scissors cut out Cinderella. There isn't generally too much slapstick, but just, as she says, a temptation to smile, and I love her humor. Cinderella was very well received, and it was even released in the United States a little 6 years later in 1928. It was released with a Jean Renoir film, Nana, and the New York Times critic actually really didn't like the feature film that it was attached to, but was absolutely in raptures over Cinderella. The effect is extraordinary. In ordinary films, even when they are good, I always have a feeling of heaviness, of drama struggling for expression under the handicap of silence. Here, that feeling is entirely absent. In its place is a sensation of gaiety, of lightness, of the just use of material. What opportunity the silhouette gives to caricature, with how little apparent labor one passes from one effect to another. How the small black shapes laugh at you from a world of their own into which naturalism makes no laborious entry. So at this point, Lotte is really beginning to garner attention. And one person whose attention she caught was that of a banker named Louis Hagen, who had, in order to stave off inflation, bought a large quantity of raw film stock and was wanting to use it to make a film. And he visited the Institute for Cultural Research and was very impressed by Lotte's work. And he approached her with the suggestion that she could make a feature-length animated film. This idea was completely unheard of in Europe and America. The only feature-length animated film that had been made up to that point was in Argentina and is considered a lost film today. So from Lotte's point of view, this was completely new territory, and she wasn't sure that an animated film would be able to hold people's attention for a full 6 reels. But she liked the idea of the challenge, and she liked the idea of actually having funding to do this and to have a patron that was really gung-ho about her work. And so she and a 5-person crew moved down to Potsdam, where Louis Hagen's summer home was, or country home was, and they started work on animating The Adventures of Prince Achmed. Here you can see Lotte down on her knees animating on the ground, and this, as she still called it, trick table, really is the first multi-plane animation camera. It was developed by her husband, Carl Koch, who's up at the ladder, and Carl was an absolute rock for Lotte their entire lives. He was her cameraman and technical crew, and they worked together very closely on all of her films. Then we have 2 more of the crew animating on the higher plane of glass at the moment is Walter Turk. And then the man to the side with the notebook is Alexander Carden, who was basically doing the part of a script supervisor. He was noting down what they had shot. The other 2 members of the crew were 2 animators who had made names for themselves independently from Lotte. They were Walter Ruttmann and Bertold Bartosz. Because of the funding and because of this amazing multi-plane camera, and because she had access to a really high quality crew, the effects in The Adventures of Prince Achmed are absolutely stunning. Of course, in order to achieve them, they had to do most of the animating down on their knees, as you can see. And Louis Hagen's son, who was also Louis Hagen Jr. or Booty, was on the property a lot of the time. And he said, "When the bell rang for lunch, we heard all kinds of moans and grunts as if they had been in some kind of torture chamber. The reason was the studio wasn't very high and all the animation on the table had to be done at floor level. So you can imagine if you spend hours crawling on your knees, it's bound to be painful when you get up." So here, though, you can see some of the amazing effects that they were able to achieve on The Adventures of Prince Achmed. This is a shot of, so Carl Koch is on the ladder still, Lotte's to the right, and then the man partially obscured to the left holding the paintbrush with the sand is Walter Ruttmann doing some of the effects. And the sand is below the figures and between the figures and the lamp, and it's creating things like the cloud effects at the end of this shot here, which I'll play for you again. The Adventures of Prince Achmed was a sensation when it was released. It wasn't necessarily a huge financial hit, but it got the attention of the artistic film community in Europe, and was very much championed by the French filmmaker Jean Renoir, and the effects that were achieved by Lotte and Walter Ruttmann and Bertold Bartosz really came in for praise. And most of Lotte's reputation is based on the existence of The Adventures of Prince Achmed and how unique it was at the time, that it was both this incredible historical achievement of being the first feature-length animated film in Europe, and also just on an artistic level as well. Lotte never had a crew of the same size as she did on The Adventures of Prince Achmed in later films. So though the silhouettes are very complex in her later films, she never quite had the same effects, which you can see how beautiful though this film is. And those particular light effects were a specialty of Bertold Bartosz, who then took the concept of the multiplane camera and in Paris created his own short animated film, L'Idée. Lotte did attempt to do another feature-length animated film in her next film, the Dr. Dolittle and His Animals, which was going to be 6 reels long, a feature-length film. She completed 3 reels of it between September of 1927 and September of 1928, and those 3 reels premiered in December of 1928. But 1928 was just as sound was coming in, and the producers backing her film didn't think that it was going to be possible to have a financial success of a silent animated film in 1928. So the subsequent 3 reels were never made, and Dr. Dolittle and His Animals remained as 3 short films rather than the intended feature-length film. So at that point, Lotte had to contend with the fact that she was going to have to introduce sound to her films. And she didn't really like the idea of her silhouettes talking. They have such a beautiful otherworldly quality about them, and she felt that that would take something away. But she solved this problem through music. And her first sound film was called 10-Minute Mozart, using the music of Mozart. And here. She said, with talkies, animating assumed a ballet-like character, and I liked that a lot. I was interested in dance, and I danced well in my youth. So we made the opera-based material. I like opera very much, and I like to make fun of it. So she made, after the 10-Minute Mozart, several opera-based films, including in 1935, her film Papageno, the Bird Catcher.
Vor der Wagen wünscht Papageno sie. Oh, so ein sanftes Weibchen wär Seligkeit für mich.
Where she actually is having her Papageno singing, and his mouth is moving with the music. You can understand that this added a huge layer of complexity to her animation, and again, in true Lotte Reiniger style, she went into exactly how she did it. She would create these very careful storyboards. She said, the action is controlled by means of the original music chart, which you can see on the top, which acts as a guide to each frame-by-frame movement. We are thinking in terms of so many frames to each beat of music, and we adjust the limbs and the expressions of our characters in such a way that they respond to the music as subtly as we can make them. And then down below, you see the little storyboard of what each of the movements should be, along with the music. So both of these can be read together, up and down. And so with the little storyboard figures in mind at the bottom, I'm going to show you that exact section of Papageno here.
Papageno, bist du mir ganz gegeben?
Ich dir ganz ergeben.
Nun so sei mein liebes Weibchen.
So sei mein Herzenskreuzchen.
Mein liebes Weibchen, mein liebes Weibchen.
Now, Lotte, as I said, became friends with many of the film people within Europe, and her biggest celebrator was Jean Renoir. And he said many very complimentary things about her. Here I have a quote: "Her fingers clasping her only tool, scissors, made me think of a graceful classical dancer." But he also described meeting her for the first time. And this is how he described it. "What do you say if you find yourself suddenly in the presence of Mozart? Especially if this Mozart is a discerning woman, slightly plump, and chatting like a magpie. A sentence came to my lips, but I did not dare pronounce it. This sentence was, 'You have fairy hands.' This was no flattery. It was simply a statement of fact. She creates miracles." And this picture of Lotte and Jean Renoir is on the set of a film that they collaborated on called The Pursuit of Happiness. And you can see there's a wax figure of Charlie Chaplin in the background, which features in the film. The Pursuit of Happiness was a hybrid animation and live action film. Now, throughout the 30s, Lotte and Carl were traveling all around Europe. Carl became very good friends with Jean Renoir, became one of his screenwriters and also Jean Renoir's assistant director, and worked on such films as La Grande Illusion, La Marseillaise, which has a shadow puppet scene by Lotte in it, and The Rules of the Game. In 1939, Lotte and Carl went to Rome to work with Jean Renoir on Tosca. Now, of course, we're talking about Europe in the late 1930s, and the specter of World War II is definitely hanging heavy over everything. And part of the reason why Lotte and Carl were traveling so much during the 1930s was that they did not want to be in Berlin at that time. When in 1939, Jean Renoir started filming Tosca in Italy, they got about a week into production, and then it was decided that it wasn't safe for Jean Renoir as a Frenchman to be in Mussolini's Italy at that time. And so he left Tosca in the hands of Carl Koch, who finished directing it. I'd like to compare this time for Lotte and Carl to a scene in The Pursuit of Happiness that Lotte animated of Luck dancing across the world, spreading her flowers, and then the world sort of spins out of control. And here you can see how she would combine her silhouettes with other forms of animation. She was always experimenting. And so we enter the 1940s. And at that time, it was very difficult for Lotte to get funding for her silhouette films. She did return to Berlin in 1943 because her mother was ill, and remember, she was an only child. But in trying to get funding for her films, there is a quote from Willie Krauss, who was one of the pro-Nazi Party actors at the time, who actually said, "The silhouette film is not realistic. Its illusion and its form is romantic. We no longer have a romantic space, but rather a realistic one." And he also said, "We need healthy food for the German people. What they produce is caviar, which does not interest us." Lotte, while living in Berlin, taking care of her mother, did need to make money, and she did manage to get one film approved, which was The Golden Goose. And here you can see still from it with this incredibly filigree goose whose neck is articulated. The Golden Goose, I think, was approved because it's a good German fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm, but it also is an interesting choice because it is all about the importance of humor and laughter. It is an incredibly irreverent fairy tale, and in the end, has quite an anti-authoritarian spirit to it that Lotte was able to imbue into the Golden Goose. Here you can see a clip from the very end of the film, and you will see that in this, the silhouettes do actually talk, and in fact they're speaking English because she didn't finish the film until quite a bit later, but
Then the goose pecked at his sleeve. "What do you want, you stupid bird? Speak. Dummling is merciful. He will be a good ruler after you."
So this is the last thing that the film leaves you with. And if you didn't hear, what the goose tells the tyrant king is Dummling, who is the main character and the owner of the Golden Goose, Dummling is merciful. He will make a good ruler after you. Which I feel is a quite pointed thing to be having as the culmination of your film that you're animating in 1943 Berlin. In April of 1944, Karl was conscripted into the army, but went AWOL and had to hide from both the German and the Russian forces for weeks, and Lotte did not know whether he was alive or dead. But Lotte, Karl, and her mother did survive the war, and in 1946, an article says, "In a severely destroyed Berlin street, a woman continues to work unperturbed. Up there under the roof, fragile, ornamented creatures climb up the walls like fantasy wallpaper. Mrs. Lotte Reiniger is back at work with the same wonderful, irrepressible determination." But after the war, Karl and Lotte really were not interested in staying in Germany. Lotte had spent a little bit of time in Great Britain, and she had actually in the 30s had animated ads for the British Postal Service for their telegram service, and these were her first silhouette films to use color, and so here you can see the use of color in it. Be an angel and send one. So again, she is experimenting, and so this happened in 1938, but it had meant that the British Postal Service was aware of her work, and when she came to Great Britain in 1949 with Karl, she was able to get work making advertising films for the Crown Film Unit for various government services, including a really quite delightful animated film that's 10 minutes long, made for the London Ministry of Health. It's a hygiene PSA called Mary's Birthday. The human figures are animated in silhouette, but they're only a small component of this world that also has flower fairies, flies, and germs. And basically, the film is a war between the flower fairies trying to protect Mary's little birthday party from the flies and the germs who want to ruin it, which I also think is quite appropriate for these times as well. So here you can see in this still that the flies have transparent colored wings, and the backgrounds are painted, but you will also see when I play the clip that she is incorporating silhouettes in as well. So this clip shows the leader of the flies spying on Mary's aunt, who has a cold and might be coming to the birthday. So. I love how the reflection is in color. Well, and there are the germs. So we think often of Lotte's work as being very monochrome, but when she was given the opportunity to work in color, she actually did some really creative, amazing, quite psychedelic things. Now, through these films that she was making for the Crown Film Unit, she got the attention of someone from her past. The young boy who had observed their groans and grunts as they were standing up from the animation table doing the Adventures of Prince Achmed, Louis Hagen Jr. Had, after an absolutely horrific experience of World War II, he had been sent to a concentration camp at the age of 15. He had emigrated to the UK, and he came across Lotte again and wanted to work with her and to produce her films like his father did before him. His father was a little less encouraging on this front. When Louis Hagen Jr. said to his father that he was thinking about producing films for Lotte Reiniger, his father said, "I financed a lot of their films and never got a brass farthing back, but I enjoyed it and could afford it. I was a wealthy banker, but you're a poor refugee." And Louis Hagen says that he replied, "Papa, you're so right," and I went and did the opposite. And so here they formed Primrose Productions to create Lotte Reiniger silhouette films. And you can see that the production team was Carl Koch, Louis Hagen, and Vivian Milroy, who was a producer in British television. Here the films that they made were mostly 10-minute fairy tale films intended for television audiences. And here you can see how Lotte's wit still was coming through in her animation of the Frog Prince. But this animating for television, both for British and American audiences, actually was a pretty breakneck pace that she was having to maintain. Lotte had to make 23 10-minute films in 1953 and 1954. And I think that that pace was not sustainable and was wearing on her. She said, "The movies I made that, of the movies from her earlier time in Germany, the movies I made then had their own character and more personal style compared with the fairy tale film series from the 50s. And As the 50s wore on, she and Louis Hagen Jr. did have a falling out. Some felt that it was over money. I have a feeling that Lotte was just feeling burnt out by the pressure of having to continuously churn out these fairy tale films. And she was recycling films from earlier in her life. And so they parted ways. And Lotte, again, decided to experiment. She knew that people were wanting more and more color films, and so she decided to try doing color cutout films. And here you can see the puppets from her film La Belle Hélène from 1957. At this point, they are completely not silhouettes. They have faces and can create quite interesting effects. She also returned to working from operas and more adult material. A Night in the Harem from 1958 was based on a Mozart opera. It also shows a return to the unfortunate Orientalism that Lotte did sometimes indulge in. She was very charmed by the idea of Orientalism because that's where silhouette films came from, or silhouette puppetry came from the East, but she didn't always capture the cultures in the most faithful way. But here you can see her combining the color cutout animation with silhouette animation as the figure of the favorite moves from a lighted interior out into the night. And in case you missed it, the lion is now in the cage for La Favorita, and the Sultan will have a little bit of a surprise when he comes back. As Lotte's life went on into the 60s, she and Carl became naturalized UK citizens in December of 1962. And then less than a year later, on December 1st of 1963, Carl died of kidney failure. He had been really the stabilizing presence in her life. And as she described it, Carl was my best critic. When I showed him something and he liked it, I was happy. When I lost my husband, I could not make any more movies. We have always worked together very well. It was wonderful. When he said something is good, it made me stop worrying. At that point, she sold her trick table to the Dusseldorf Film Museum and decided to concentrate more on shadow puppetry, which was a smaller, more intimate way of performing for people. And she would put on presentations for children and family, both in the UK and in Germany. She also still would work on a larger scale. She did, in 1969, made 26 biblical shadow plays for a television station. But again, the pace of that was hard for her to maintain. And she said, when talking about her work in shadow puppetry, if only they knew how much one shares of oneself through one's hands during one of these recordings. And here you can see how she would manipulate the puppets using rods so that the shadows of the rods would not interfere too much in the story that she was telling with her puppets up against the screens. Now, a lot of pioneers in early film have a slow fade out where they believe that their films are lost and their work forgotten. But that was not to be the case with Lotte Reiniger. And it happened again through the Hagen family that she had another act at the end of her life. In the late 60s, a young friend of the Hagen family, John Isaacs, who was studying in university, came across the Primrose fairy tale films, and he said to Louis Hagen Jr. that he really wanted to meet Lotte and make a little documentary about how she accomplished these films. So in 1969, he went to the Abbey, the artist commune, the Abbey Arts Center, where Lotte had been living since the 50s, and recorded her and her process of how she makes her silhouette films. And here, the audio on this clip is very bad, but you will see her demonstrating how she animated Papageno.
Out, then you see this joy that your figure now is a real silhouette.
To make the figure move, it must be placed in the correct position and a shot taken. The figure is then moved a fraction further and a second shot is taken.
The other thing in conjunction with creating this documentary was that John Isaacs and Louis Hagen went to the British Film Institute, where they had heard that a nitrate print of the Adventures of Prince Achmed still was preserved. Lotte had been under the impression that the Adventures of Prince Achmed was a lost film. In fact, she had remade portions of it later on in her life. And the original negative was destroyed in the bombings in Berlin, but the entire film was in the British Film Institute archives. And in 1970, with Lotte's guidance on how the tinting should be, they restored it. And so this little documentary and The Adventures of Prince Achmed were re-released in 1970. This restoration of Achmed went on to win a Golden Bear at the Berlin Film Festival, and real interest in Lotte and her work was spearheaded because of this. She, in 1972, won a German film award, the Gold Film Band, and this is very typical of her. She was a lifelong smoker, and there she is holding her award. She also, in 1970, wrote the book that I've been quoting from, Shadow Puppets, Shadow Theaters, and Shadow Films. And she started to be in demand as a leader of workshops and lecturing. She did a lecture tour in Germany in 1972 and in 1974 in North America. Apparently, she was traveling around so much that when asked where she was off to next, she would raise her hands and say, "I'm just a package." At a presentation of The Adventures of Prince Achmed in San Francisco, she describes how a noble hippie with a long robe and hair came to me. He looked like Sarastro. "Tell me," he said, "how did you make that film in 1926? I said, "Probably because we were hippies ourselves. We dressed not so, but we felt so." In 1975, she was invited by the National Film Board of Canada in Montreal to come and animate a new silhouette film. And though she had said that she never would after Carl's death, she did. And here you can see her animating Aucassin et Nicolette. She says, "I did it with trembling hands, thinking I couldn't do it anymore." But here you'll see in this clip that her hands did not tremble too much. then she went on in 1978 to create a 20-minute animated film, The Rose in the Ring, also with the National Film Board of Canada, which was based on a Thackeray story. And in 1981, she even animated in Germany a short 4-minute film, The Four Seasons. Here Lotte is in 1981 with the figure from her first film, Ornament of a Lovestuck Heart. And she kept as many of her puppets as she possibly could, and she treated them like family. So here you can see Lotte. Lotte died of a stroke on June 19th, 1981. And included in her obituary was a cutout she had made of her and Carl in a boat, and a little poem that she had written which said, "Little sailing boat, carry me once more, carry once more my Carl and me." But Lotte's influence on the history of film really is immeasurable, and she always liked to look at life from the point of view of a fairy tale. And here you can see what she said: "If you do the things that you like, you have to stand behind it with all your soul. To be ashamed of fairy tales is an outright folly. I believe more in fairy tales than I do in newspapers." So that is Lotte Reiniger. And this photograph was given to John Isaacs by Lotte Reiniger, and he very kindly let me use it in the talk today. So thank you so much.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Now we all have to come back and see a full film.
Yeah.
Questions?
Is it first? Yeah, Sarah.
How in the world did you run into her?
Oh, you mean how did I find out about her existence?
Yeah.
When I was at St. Andrews for college, they had a really great film library. She was not covered in any of the film studies courses I took, which was a real shame. But I was looking through the DVDs that they had in the film library, and I'm a huge fan of fairy tales, and I saw this spine for the Adventures of Prince Achmed, and I thought, that looks intriguing. And so I took it out of the library and fell absolutely in love with it. So, yes.
Amazing.
So I guess it was a little serendipity.
Did you say that John Isaacs lives in Chatham, or?
He lives over the border in New York State these days, and I think that he is watching the lecture, hopefully, at the moment over the Zoom. Yes.
Did she get much play in the United States in the 60s and 70s?
So in the 50s, her fairy tale films were being shown in places like the Museum of Modern Art. And actually in 1957, the New York Times included in their sort of end of the year wrap up of their top 10 non-theatrical film releases, her fairy tale films were included in that list. And then in her sort of Renaissance period, she was traveling all over the US, and The Adventures of Prince Achmed was being shown. Do you have a follow-up question?
Did they ever take a movie of her actually cutting?
Yes, they did. And I did not include that clip, but I put together on YouTube a playlist of Lotte Reiniger shorts. And in that playlist, I did include the John Isaacs documentary. And I can provide you a link to that, which and also over Zoom, the link to that playlist has been emailed out to all of you Zoomers, hopefully. So you should be able to follow up this lecture with actually seeing the short films that I've been discussing. But it is quite amazing, though, to see her cutting figures out herself.
You showed the images of parts of the body separate.
Yes.
Those were then maneuvered.
Yes, and she would have little wire hinges,
Okay.
which she could undo and take one head off, say, and put on another one if the head had to change in between shots. So everything was mobile and adaptable. She was incredible.
Did she ever do a figure and then do the same figure with a slightly different move
Yes.
as well?
Yes, so I think Prince Achmed, she had maybe 26 versions of Prince Achmed for the entire filming of the feature-length film.
Okay.
Janet?
Are her puppets archived anywhere or in a museum?
Yes, the Dusseldorf Film Museum has a good number of her work. I don't know if they're in other places as well, because she was in England for a very long time and in Canada, but her puppets have been preserved. They're maybe not that close by, but once people are able to travel freely, I would love to go see them.
I probably know the answer to this because your husband, but are any of I can't remember though. Are any of her films available at the moment on streaming services on the internet?
Ooh. So the Criterion Channel did have The Adventures of Prince Achmed for a little while, but they don't at the moment. But there is a really beautiful Milestone edition Blu-ray of The Adventures of Prince Achmed. Milestone is a great company, and they, in the Blu-ray version, also have about 8 or 9 short films of Lotte's on it as well. So this is an incredible resource if you want to see more of what she did. Then the other great American release, this is early women film pioneers from Flicker Alley, and it's not just Lotte. This is actually a really incredible box set of all sorts of early directors like Alice Guy and Lois Weber and Claire Parker, Germaine Dulac. It's amazing, but it has 3 really wonderful Lotte Reiniger shorts of Harlequin, The Stolen Heart, and Papageno. And actually I put together a little slide of resources. If you want to find out more about her, there is one biography that was released in 2017, which I got a lot of the quotes that I used either from a Sight and Sound article that Lotte wrote in '36, her book, Shadow Puppets, Shadow Theaters, Shadow Films from 1970, or from the Lotte Reiniger pioneer of film animation, which Whitney Grace had access to a lot more resources than I did, and also I think must read German, which I do not. So a lot of the quotes that I got from that as well.
How many of you not seen Prince Achmed? Some of you seen him? No? Then we're going to come back and have you show it.
Are there any questions on Zoom or?
No, just if you can repeat the in-person questions back so that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Trady?
Yeah, I found the section where you had the notes and then the movements coordinated. That was just so fascinating. And I was wondering though, with genre law, did they ever get back together again or meet again?
Yes, so I was just asked if Lotte Reiniger ever collaborated with or met up with Jean Renoir again. They didn't collaborate film-wise, but they remained friends for the rest of their lives. And I believe that she visited him in LA on that trip where she met the hippie in San Francisco. And so their friendship lasted the entirety of their lives. Also, I do find it interesting in the case of Jean Renoir and Lotte, both of them were directors who were very collaborative with their spouses. Lotte and Carl, and also Jean Renoir and his wife Marguerite, who edited all of his films. And so I think that that also helped in terms of the friendship that they had, a nice sort of respect for each other and each other's spouses. Dr. Weaver?
Is there anybody contemporary that can even approach the intricacy of her silhouette?
So there are a few animators who work in similar styles, and also some artists that work in cutout, in the field of cutouts, just stationary ones. Kara Walker being the most prominent and is an amazing African-American artist who uses cutouts to sort of portray the experience of being Black in America, and I think likes the sort of clean lines of the sharp cutouts. I don't think that Kara Walker herself was influenced by Lotte Reiniger. I think that that was just that cutouts were her the best medium for what she wanted to convey, though I do know that she is, of course, aware of Lotte Reiniger's work. In terms of animation, I would have to look up the names. I know that there's a French animator who does use silhouettes, Michel Ossolet, I think. But in terms of complexity and the delicacy of the wit in her films, Lotte is really quite unique. But she's definitely admired by many animators who want to emulate her style, if not the actual medium that she uses.
Did Walt Disney know about her?
He didn't ever talk about her. The film world in the 1920s was a pretty small place. Lotte did visit the Disney studios at least once in her life, but she didn't meet Walt Disney then. That was later on in the 70s. Walt Disney did like to put forward the idea that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the first feature-length animated film. It wasn't. It was the first cell animation drawn feature-length animated film. But I think that The Adventures of Prince Achmed was maybe a little convenient for the neat narrative of Disney doing something that had never been done before. Also, the Walt Disney Studios patented the multiplane camera. Again, I don't think that this was a direct copying of what Lotte and Carl had developed for The Adventures of Prince Achmed. It was more a case of when you are animating films, you have a problem that you need to solve, and the multiplane camera really helps solve that. But it did give the sense that the Walt Disney Company invented the multiplane camera, which they did not. But Lotte was always on a much smaller scale. It was for the most part, other than for the Adventures of Prince Achmed, just her and Carl working together on these films. And Walt Disney Studios had a whole studio with animators and the ink and paint department and all of these other people making hundreds of short films and feature films. And so it was just a very different scale that they were working on. Dr. Weaver?
Back, I think, in the late 40s and early 50s, there was a fairly well-known actor teacher by the name of Uta Hagen. What was the relation?
So the question is if Uta Hagen was related to Louis Hagen, and that I have not come across anything that would say that she was. So that I do not know, but I don't believe so.
Would you all like to see more of her films?
Is there any questions over Zoom or?
I wonder if you might be interested. John Isaacs would like to make a live comment over the.
Yeah, that would be great.
Chat, which I can. You have to do it over on your computer.
Okay.
Let him in.
To see if he can. Let's see. No, it's not in chat. Where is it? Oh, you know where it's in participants. Let me see if I can get this to work.
So we're just trying to see if we can get on the screen comment by John Isaacs, who knew Lotte and created the documentary that I showed a very short excerpt from.
Oh, you know what? It won't let me take his question because you're not the host over here.
Okay.
There's another question. Do you have more programs, and what is coming up next?
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Maureen has just commented, just to add, read the availability of her work in the 50s. As a young child, I saw her short films in New York City on WNT, TV public radio, and never forgot them. They were mesmerizing. Thank you for your wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I don't, is the question about, is Ventfort Hall doing more, or is the question about, am I doing more?
I think for you specifically. There we go.
At the moment, I am just working on writing a screenplay about the Shakers. And so researching that, I've been working on that for almost 2 years now, with a director, and we've been wanting to tell the story of two Shakers who eloped from Hancock Shaker Village. But have you worked out?
I think he might be on there. John, are you there?
I'm here, yeah.
Oh, lovely. We can hear you.
Oh, good. Well, I don't want to break into another question. Somebody else was...
No, I think the questions are pretty much...
Okay. Okay, I just, first of all, Nannina, you know, your enthusiasm is so impressive for Lotte, and your research too. So congratulations, and a lovely and interesting presentation.
Thank you.
As you know, I'm probably one of the few remaining people who knew Lotte. She was absolutely charming, but in many respects, but she was something of a contradiction. She was also kind of a tough cookie as well. And you never quite knew what you were dealing with. But the strongest memory I have is visiting her at the artist community where she lived in North London, which had been established by a refugee from East Germany. And she had lived there with Carl, and when Carl died, she continued to live there. And it was there that we found her, Budi and I, in 1968, 69 or so, in really quite miserable circumstances. It was rather sad. And she was all but completely ignored. And it was just such a great pleasure to watch her regain her reputation and become something of a greatly celebrated figure in the history of the cinema. And the one thing I remember most about visiting her, as she always was, chain smoking and terribly talkative, but she had all her marionettes and puppets were hanging from the walls of her rather small and crowded apartment. And she would talk to them and treat them as though they were fellow human beings. And when you heard her do this, it was absolutely convincing. And it wasn't like talking to pets. She really, really did treat them like other living human beings. And I think that's how she approached the characters in her filmmaking, and which is why they resonate with such extraordinary charm and reality. And I just thought I'd mention that as my strongest memory of her.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and for attending, and for speaking to me on the phone. That was very, very nice.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much.